if you look, for example, the US has one main battle tank. I think Europe has 17 different models. And you can go through the different systems and you can see it's not only a question of interoperability, it's also the question, how can we build in the foreseeable future something like a really authentic European defense industry? I understand that for the British government, it is of fundamental importance not to be out of these processes, but that we all can use the strong capacity of the British defense industry also in cooperation with what we are doing in the European Union. So I think it is in both of our interests to strengthen these ties.
There is always a fear, though, that should we not be doing this through NATO? That's the most important defense pact for both of our countries, I would suggest. It's what has kept us free for over 70 years and saw off the Soviet threat. I mean, shouldn't we always be careful in this to work through NATO, which is a military pact, rather than, as some in this country are billing it, as a step towards closer military and security ties for Britain with the EU? Now, there's nothing wrong about that in play. There could be even some sense to it. But at the end, we all depend on NATO for our freedoms and our defense.
Yes, I fully agree. I fully agree, Andrew. And for German politics, it has always been fundamental to strengthen the transatlantic relationship, to strengthen NATO. But given the challenges we are facing, and if you look also at what we hear from the US Congress, from the US administration, there is also a clear expectation that we strengthen our own capacities in Europe, that we strengthen the European pillar within NATO, clearly within NATO. And that is what we are doing, for example, by expanding that cooperation. But I would make really a distinction between what we do bilaterally and the upcoming discussions the British government is going to have with the EU Commission on questions like the development we have in Brussels, European Defence Initiative. We will have for the first time an EU Defence Commissioner. So we are doing a lot to strengthen the European Union's capacities, but we want the United Kingdom to be part of that strengthening process.
How much scope, in addition to defence, do you think there is? Britain, for good or ill, Britain is out of the EU, but how much scope is there for closer UK-EU ties without the UK rejoining the EU? Is that a realistic proposition?
I would say yes, it is a realistic proposition because there is a lot you can do simply through cooperation. And I've mentioned the European Defence Initiative. So in the next 5 years, you are going to see in Brussels, in the European Union, a huge build-up of our industrial capacities, of our joint investment in that, maybe joint procurement. And I understand that for the British government, it is of fundamental importance not to be out of these processes, but that we all can use the strong capacity of the British defense industry also in cooperation with what we are doing in the European Union. So I think it is in both of our interests to strengthen these ties.
Given that we probably, both of our countries probably still, we spend more than we did, but we probably still don't spend enough on defence. Certainly a lot of the East European states don't think we do, and America doesn't think we do. Can you build this European Union defence capability without having to move funds from what would go on NATO?
I think there are a lot of efficiencies which are still possible. If you look, for example, the US has one main battle tank. I think Europe has 17 different models. And you can go through the different systems and you can see it's not only a question of interoperability, it's also the question, how can we build in the foreseeable future something like a really authentic European defense industry? And this will not be an easy process because it will mean that we have to pool capacities, we have to develop projects together in order to make the synergy. So it's not always about spending more money, but about how can we spend the money more wisely.
Do you see what you've been talking about in this Anglo-German defense treaty as well, but what you've been talking about with the EU? Could we see this as perhaps prudent preparations in some way for Europe in general, Germany in particular, in anticipation of a second Trump presidency?
Not really, because in the end, we all depend on a strong NATO, and a strong NATO is not possible without 100% US commitment to NATO and a US commitment to Article 5. So whatever we are doing here, it can never replace the support of the United States to Europe's security. And I must say we are pretty confident that things have changed substantially since the first Trump administration. And you mentioned yourself the spending which has gone up and the debate we have had over that. So for us, as whoever governs in the United States, this commitment to NATO is absolutely essential and irreplaceable.
But I'm not sure the Americans, particularly a Trump America, will think that we're still doing enough. The Baltic states and Poland want Europe's NATO members to increase their defense spending to 3%. Now, we in Britain, we're not committed to more than 2.5. And even then, that'll take till 2030. Who knows what will have happened in Ukraine by 2030? Germany has only belatedly made the 2% of GDP mark on defense. I mean, if we really want to convince the Americans that we are, quote, all in this together, aren't the Baltic states right? Don't we have to do more?
Yeah, this is an ongoing debate. And, the percentage maybe doesn't reflect the amount of money. Because if you take the German economy, 2% defense spending in Germany is maybe more than many other countries pay together.
Well, it's more than them all, except America, because your GDP is bigger than every other European
GDP
nation.
Is bigger. So if we really manage to build up industrial capacities and change our armed forces in a way that we are doing it and currently undertaking it, we have spent 100 billion euros in a special defense fund. So a lot is going on, but we also have to see, Andrew, that industry needs time to absorb this amount of money because you need time to plan for industrial production. So it's not that you can spend overnight billions of euros. That needs to be built up over a longer period. And I think we are on the way of doing that.
But we're having to do it at very difficult times, and not a great time for Europe either. I mean, let's just look at Germany and Europe as we try to remilitarize in the face of various threats. In economic terms, America's leaving Europe in its rear view mirror. You'll have seen the cover story in The Economist last week. In an age of geopolitical turmoil, Europe is on the sidelines now. I think what worries a lot of us is, can the decline of Europe be reversed if its industrial powerhouse, which is Germany, is also now in decline?
Yeah, I mean, we are still the third largest economy in the world. So it's we have to put everything into perspective because, yes, the German industry is under pressure. Number one, because we got out of Russian oil and gas at a very high cost. It was a political decision. It was necessary, but it came as a shock to industry. Second, we see that China isn't buying as much as it did in the past. And Germany is a very export-oriented country. But you are right. We need to do more to become more competitive. And we have an excellent report by the former president of the European Central Bank, Mario Draghi, who has laid out a way forward to strengthen our competitiveness. And yes, we have to invest much more in modern technologies in order not to lose out against the US. But when we speak about the US, we should not forget that the Biden administration has spent hundreds of billions of US dollars in the CHIPS Act, Inflation Reduction Act, and other measures to stimulate that growth. And in the United Kingdom, in Europe, we simply don't have that amount of money.
No, indeed. So much more I'd love to talk to you about, Ambassador. We're going to have to leave it there for now. But I hope we can entice you back onto the show to go through some of these issues. We can explore them in more detail. It's been a pleasure to have you on the Andrew Neil Show today, Ambassador. Thank you.
Thank you very much for having me.